Today we're studying Ruth Chapter 2. We're starting the first part of Ruth Chapter 2. Ethan will be here next week. He asked if we could trade places, and so you have to have 2 doses of me here right next to each other. This morning I'd like for you to invite you to follow me on a bit of a wild goose chase as we start. I promise that we'll end up in Ruth chapter 2, but I hope that what I have to say here will explain or help explain some of the things that are going to happen later on in the book of Ruth. And so, to begin with, put your marker in Ruth because we will come back. But find Numbers chapter 15. I want to read you a couple of verses here, 2 or 3, that kind of set the stage, and you may recognize what it's talking about when we read it here. In chapter 15 of Numbers, in verse 37, is where we're going to start. It says, "And again the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel. Tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassel of the corners. And you shall have the tassel, that you may look upon it, and remember the commandments of the Lord, and do them, and that you may not follow the harlotry to which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined." So they put these tassels on their garments, so when they saw them, it reminded them of the commandments of the Lord. Now, those tassels are called tzitzit, or tzitziot, if you're talking about plural, if it's tassels. It's spelled T-Z-I-T-Z-I, tzitzit. Just like you would, I don't know how we would use that. Mom used to do something when she was scolding you, she'd say, that's kind of what it is. Anyway, they are specially made tassels for the fringes that are worn on the corners of a man's tallit. Now, the tallit in early times, the tallit was a robe or a cloak, and it was part of the male person's formal attire. That's what he wore every day, normal attire. After clothes stopped being made with corners and they were a little bit different, Judaism created the modern tallit, and if you look it up today, it's a prayer shawl. They wear it around the corner. Still has the tassels on it, but they don't wear tassels on their clothes. They wear this prayer shawl, and the tassels were on the corners. All right, next go to Malachi chapter 4. The best way to find Malachi is to find Matthew and then back up 1 page. We'll be at the end of Malachi chapter 4, verse 2. It's a prophecy of the Messiah. It says, "But to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness, or the Dayspring, shall arise with healing in his wings, and you shall go out and grow fat like stall-fed calves." That's a little bit of a strange verse just to kind of pluck out. That whole section there is a prophecy of the Messiah. But it says there, "Those of you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings." In Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2, we won't go there, but it refers to those in darkness have seen a great light. And that's referred to in the New Testament as well. Speaking of those who are living in dark times have seen a bright light. When the Messiah came, he provided or brought a great light. Now come with me on to Matthew chapter 9. We'll read a short passage. You'll be familiar with this one. In chapter 9, we're going to read verse 20 and 22. The whole little passage there is from 18 to 26. If you want to spend a little time looking at the whole thing. But in verse 20, it reads, Jesus he's teaching, and a man comes and says, my daughter is dying, will you come and heal her? And he said, yes. And so he turns to leave, and suddenly a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years, it says in verse 20 there, came from behind and touched the hem of his garment. For she said to herself, if only I may touch his garment, I shall be made well. But Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, be of good cheer, daughter. Your faith has made you well. And the woman was made well from that hour. So a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years, she comes through the crowd and she touches the hem of his garment, that phrase. She was healed. The hem of his garment was the end or the corner of his talent. His talent is it's almost like a bathrobe. It had long sleeves, but the sleeves were long and almost like curtains. When he held his arms out like this, it's like he had wings. I think like a flying squirrel. He got the web in between their front legs and their hind legs, and so he looked twice as big when he held his wings out like this. All right? It's referred to many times in Scripture. We've seen in Numbers 15, and in 1 Samuel chapter 24, you remember when David is hiding in the cave and Saul is after him. And Saul, it says, Saul came in to relieve himself. And while he was there taking care of business, David slips up behind him and he cuts the corner off of his robe. He got his status symbol. He stole his talent. He stole his tassel. And then again in 1 Samuel 15, Saul is speaking with the prophet Samuel, and Samuel tells him God's going to tear the kingdom away from you, and he turns to leave, and Saul grabs at his robe to get him to stay. He wants to ask him to go with him to worship the Lord, and Samuel's angry, and he turns to leave, and Saul grabs his robe and he tears the hem of his garment. That's also speaking about that portion that has the tassel. In Matthew chapter 14 and Mark chapter 5, we read about the people of Gennesaret. Jesus had gone there, and the people recognized him, it says, and they brought all of their sick in the main to him so they could touch the hem of his garment and be healed. So here in Ruth chapter 2, verse 12, Boaz makes a reference, and I'll just read that to you. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. The concept of an old broody hen hovering around goes all the way back to the creation. You remember? It says that the Spirit of God was hovering over the chaotic waters as he anticipates the creation. It's like he's thinking. He's figuring out how he's going to do this. That's the image I get. But anyway, it says that the Spirit of God brooded over the waters. And we still talk that way today, of taking someone under our wing for protection or to mentor or for training. You know, you're going to train someone for a new job. You kind of take them, somebody who knows the ropes, is taking this younger person in and going to show them how to get along with the company they're working for or whatever. The root of that little phrase goes all the way back to the beginning of creation. All right, I said all of that to kind of fill in some little blank spots in the text. And actually, it's not a blank spot in the text, but it's a blank spot in our unfamiliarity with culture that they're in. And it'll come up again as we read through the text. We'll see a little bit of it today, but mostly it'll be the next 2 lessons or so. All right, let's begin in chapter 2. We're going to read verses 1 through 14. Now, you keep your eyes peeled. We get a peek behind the curtain, like I said last time, that separates us. Remember to ask the question when we're reading the Old Testament. What is this passage showing me about Jesus, the Messiah? So that's what you want to have in the back of your mind as we read, because that's what the Old Testament does, is it points us towards Jesus. And it's talking about Jesus and all of the examples that it gives us. Verse 1. And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, Please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him, in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, Go, my daughter. And then she left, and she went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, The Lord be with you. And they answered him, The Lord bless you. And then Boaz said to his servants, who was in charge of the reapers, Whose young woman is this? So the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered and said, It is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And he said, Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and has continued from morning until now, though she rested a little in the house. Then Boaz said to Ruth, You will listen, my daughter, won't you? Do not go to glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close by my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men, to not touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face and bowed down to the ground, and she said to him, Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? And Boaz answered and said to her, It's been fully reported to me, all that you have done for your mother-in-law, since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and mother in the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Then she said, Let me find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants. Now Boaz said to her at mealtime, Come here and eat of the bread, and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed parched grain to her, and she ate and was satisfied, and she kept some back. All right. Let me remind you, this is not anything new, but we can read these accounts and not believe. They can be just words on a page to us. If we don't see and hear our name personally, your own name in this story, in the text, then it won't connect. But these stories were written down for you and me, especially this one, because we're foreigners in God's kingdom. In a lot of ways, we're foreigners. we're 21st century Gentiles. I'm not sure whoever wrote that down would have ever thought that it would be 3 or 4 centuries later. And or 3 or 4,000, not centuries, but 1,000 years later, we will read the same lines. You remember this in John chapter 20, verse 16 or so. It's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. That's Sunday morning. Mary Magdalene is at the tomb. It's before daylight. It's still somewhat dark. And Jesus' body is gone. She thinks somebody has moved his body. But Jesus is right there. And he speaks to her and actually asks her who she's looking for. She thinks he's the gardener. And so it's not until he says her name that she is shocked back into reality that she really, that it's really him. And he's alive and touchable. And she's really surprised and beside herself. His words recorded in John chapter 10 when he says, "My sheep hear my voice." You recall those words? My sheep. That's true for Mary, it was. And we also, they're true for us. We hear his voice because we are his sheep. If we read these stories and we can't hear our name, we can't hear his voice, we have to wonder, are we really his sheep? What jumps out at us as we read this story is what Ruth is looking for. If you notice, in verse 2 and verse 10 and verse 13 is said specifically, she is looking for favor. She tells Naomi, at first, let me go and glean in the field of whoever I can find the favor of. We would call this favor grace. You remember our definition of grace is unmerited favor. This is what she's talking about. I'm looking for someone who is gracious enough to let me glean in their field. All right, when we get to the place where Ruth's heart is, our Redeemer will come for us, just like what he did for her. Listen to these verses. In verse 2 it says, "In whose sight I may find favor." And in verse 10, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should notice me? I'm a foreigner." In verse 13, "Let me find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me." And the footnote in my Bible says, "You have spoken to the heart of your maidservant." If we are like Ruth, looking for favor, and who among us is not looking for favor? Do we not want grace desperately? Realizing that we are the equivalent of idol-worshiping Moabites, we're foreigners, and we have nothing to offer the Lord, really. Only then can we be amazed and thrilled, along with Ruth, that we have one who is willing to redeem us, buying us back to give us hope and a future. Like I said earlier, we read the old scriptures asking the question, what is God like? Or how is this showing me the Messiah? Did you see him in today's reading? He's there. He's there. He's in the person of Boaz. Listen to me. Let me remind you of some of the verses we read. He says to her, "Don't glean in any other field. Never stay in my field. Stay close to my young women. Reap where they reap. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you get thirsty, drink from what is provided." There you have it. That's his care package. He gives her secure work. It's going to last till the end of the wheat harvest. It provides food. She has companionship. She has safety. All of these things. Boaz's gracious response to her and care for her. I want y'all to see the thing that Ruth hoped for, this grace, was already there. It wasn't about her performance. It was about Boaz, about who he was. He was aware of what she had done for Naomi. That gracious behavior just told him that she recognized and valued grace the same way he did. This story speaks volumes to us as we read and ask, what is God like? What is the coming one, the Messiah, like? The answer, he's like Boaz. You look at Boaz, you get a picture of our God or our Messiah. He's coming for us. The favor was in his eyes, not because of who she was, but because of who he was. And it didn't matter that she was a Moabite foreigner or that she had been an idol worshiper. As long as she was seeking his favor, he provided it. Ruth has the key for us to receive the favor of God. We must seek him with all of our heart and appreciate that favor when it comes. Don't settle for something different than the favor or the grace of God. We can and often do settle for a lot less and a lot different than our Father wants to give us. We take up lists of things and behaviors that we, quote, must have in order to please God. We jump through hoops and we kill ourselves trying to deserve God's good favor toward us. Perhaps we never realize that he gives us grace because of who he is, not because who we are. My prayer today is that that statement can be said of each of us, that we give grace because of who we have become. Don't let others starve for your favor. Pass it out like the Lord does. He is good and gracious to everyone, not just those who think they deserve it. That's my prayer, and I hope that blesses you this week as we look at this favor that Ruth was pursuing. And it's going to turn out, it's always like God's blessings. It turns out to be a lot richer and better than she ever hoped for before it's all over with. But we'll put a little sign up here that says, to be continued.